Hey everybody, welcome back to Chorus Girl Quilting, and it's Show and Tell Sunday. And today we are kicking it way old school because this right here is the very first quilt I ever made. So a little backstory. Both of my grandmothers, my granny, my mom's mom, and my nanny, my dad's mom, were quilters. And my Aunt Ruby always knew. I mean, she always was around quilting well, but she didn't really start quilting until late 80s, early 90s, making lots of quilts. But and my mom sewed my clothes when I was a kid. And about the time she was kind of done sewing clothing, I picked it up in my early 20s and kept going with that. But so I've been around sewing and crafting and quilting my entire life. But when I was in, I think probably I was in the 8th grade, going into ninth grade or so, I decided to make a quilt, and this is it. And when I say kicking it old school, I mean there were no rotary cutters, no acrylic rulers and templates and all of those things that make cutting and piecing go a lot easier. It was really kind of the old-fashioned way that my family had quilted, for eons. So this is a 9 patch. Obviously, these blocks have 9 patches in them. And there's tons of variations on a 9 patch that you can do. These strips are called sashing strips. For those of you who are not quilters, it's just a little terminology. These are sashing strips and cornerstones. And I'm trying to remember how I actually cut these out. I think probably I cut one sashing strip and then I just stacked it on my fabric and cut it out with scissors. And my aunt probably cut all these squares for me because they look pretty uniform and I was not, all caught up and doing everything accurately when I was in the 8th grade. One of the fun things about looking at quilts from my family, especially the really old ones, is that a lot of times they were made from scraps left over from garments that my grandmothers had sewn or my mom had sewn or my Aunt Ruby had sewn, or people would give them scraps. I remember my mom, when she would make our clothing, she would save up the scraps and we'd take bundles of them down to my nanny, who was doing lots of quilts at the time. And so one of the fun things is to look at these quilts and see pieces from clothing I actually had. My mom has done that with quilts that my granny has made. She would look at them and say, "Oh, I had a dress mat out of this, and it looked, it was long and it was a skinny dress and it had a coat with it." They're really fun stories to hear. But for me, there are two blocks specifically that I know exactly where the fabric came from. And this one right here is the first one. When I was in 8th grade sewing class, I made a purse out of these two fabrics right here. It was kind of what we would call now maybe a hobo bag. It was just a really loose, kind of big, wide bag, and it had the round circle plastic handles that looked like tortoise shell. And this light color here, it's actually a brushed denim, was the outside of the bag, and this navy print was the lining of the bag. Super cute. Was really proud of it. So that was that block right there. And then this block here, the stripe fabric is actually double knit. And if you're a 70s kid, if you know what double knit is. This fabric will never die. This whole quilt could disintegrate and that fabric would still be intact. But this was one of my 8th grade sewing projects. It was actually a nightgown that was kind of t-shirt style, but it was really long. It went all the way, it was ankle length. So that was a nightgown. And then this kind of chambray denim looking fabric here was a dress that I made in that class. All these other fabrics probably came from my Aunt Ruby's stash or other people. I don't know for sure. This quilt is hand quilted by my nanny. And one of the things that I remember as a kid, when we would come down here, we're at the Love Shack right now, and she lived right up the road from this house. We would go to her house and there would be these long square frames hanging from her ceiling. and they were like 1x2s or 1x1 strips of wood shaped together in a square, and those were the quilting frames. You would put your quilt sandwich on there, your backing and your batting and your quilt top. And I don't remember exactly how they go on there, but there was a way to roll them up as you quilted them. And they she and the ladies that lived out here in this community would get together, and they would have quiltings, and they'd each bring a covered dish, and they'd sit around the frames and they'd quilt those quilts. And my mom talks about that with my granny doing that. And she said, I used to get so aggravated that, all these women were hanging out at our house, and then she said, I realized this was their social activity. And it's kind of like girls' night out, only you're doing it during the day and you're sitting around quilting, but it was exactly the same thing. You're hanging out with all your girlfriends and getting some stuff done and having a lot of fun. But anyway, this is the quilt. It was done, it was hand quilted the way I just described by my nanny. The back is just plain light blue. You can see the stitching in here. And this is likely, the backing here is likely a bed sheet. Probably a full-size bed sheet, because this quilt will just fit on a queen size bed and hang over a little bit. So I used to have this in my bedroom at home on my full-size bed. And so a full-size bed sheet was enough to back the quilt and have some excess. So Nanny actually folded it over and was able to do the binding with it. There's not a separate binding that you have to cut and sew on. She just folded it in and folded it again and then stitched it down on the front. So this is my very first quilt, my 9-patch. A lot of fun memories with it, and how funny I think it is that, when I think about it now, it's actually an antique. That's crazy. I don't feel like an antique, but this could be considered an antique quilt now. So that's all for this show and tell. Thanks for watching. Keep liking and subscribing. I said this on Wednesday, but we reached over 100 subscribers this week, and I'm so excited about that. I think now my goal is to get to 200 subscribers, and with your help, I can do that. So keep watching, keep sharing, keep liking and subscribing, and we will see you on Wednesday for what I'm working on Wednesday on Chorus Girl Quilting. Bye.